The nurse was furious. She judged the grumpy Navy SEAL for being a lazy father who refused to do his physical therapy. When he missed a mandatory evaluation, she drove to his house in a freezing storm, ready to report him. But his 7-year-old son answered the door in tears. Inside, the massive SEAL was passed out, his shattered leg caked in mud. "Please don't be mad," the little boy whispered. He carried me 2 miles in the rain to the doctor. The nurse froze as the boy revealed the heartbreaking truth. "He's not my dad, and he won't take his pain pills, because he's afraid he won't hear me if I stop breathing." Clara Reed stood at the edge of the blue rehabilitation mat, holding her clipboard like a shield. As a physical therapy nurse for the Department of Veterans Affairs, she had worked with difficult men before. But Declan Hayes was in a category of his own, 35 years old, former Navy SEAL. Medically retired due to severe trauma to his right leg, and, in Clara's professional opinion, the most frustrating patient in the entire state. "You are leaning entirely on your left side, Mr. Hayes," Clara said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet clinic. "The parallel bars are here for support, not to carry your entire body weight. You need to engage the right quad." Declan gripped the steel bars. His knuckles were white. His jaw was locked tight under a dark, neatly trimmed beard. He didn't look at her. He just stared straight ahead at the blank wall, his broad shoulders rigid beneath a faded gray t-shirt. "I'm engaging it," he muttered. "Your telemetry says otherwise," Clara countered, stepping closer. "If you don't push through the initial discomfort, the scar tissue will harden. You will lose the remaining mobility." Declan suddenly let go of the bars. He reached for the heavy wooden cane leaning against the wall. "Then I lose it. We're done for today." Clara sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. It was the exact same routine every Tuesday and Thursday. He would do the bare minimum, refuse to break a sweat, and walk out. But what bothered Clara more than Declan's stubbornness was the audience. Sitting in the corner of the room on a plastic waiting chair was a 7-year-old boy, Sam. He wore a slightly oversized jacket and held a small backpack on his lap. Unlike the other children who sometimes accompanied patients, Sam never played with the clinic's toys. He never read the comic books. He just sat perfectly still, his wide, serious eyes tracking every movement of Declan's injured leg. Clara hated it. She hated seeing a child weighed down by the heavy atmosphere of a rehab clinic. She judged Declan for it. What kind of father drags his kid to a medical facility twice a week just to watch him give up? "Declan, wait," Clara said, her tone hardening. She stepped into his path. "You have your mandatory VA medical board evaluation this Friday. It is not optional. If you don't show up, or if you don't demonstrate measurable progress, the board will suspend your physical therapy funding. You could lose your housing stipend." Declan looked down at her. His eyes were a cold, exhausted shade of gray. "I know the rules, nurse." "Then act like it. For your son's sake, if not your own." A strange shadow crossed Declan's face. His grip on the cane tightened, but he didn't argue. He just turned his head. "Let's go, Sam." The boy immediately slid off the chair and walked to Declan's side, keeping pace perfectly with the man's heavy, limping stride. Friday afternoon arrived with a brutal, freezing rainstorm that turned the city streets into rivers. Clara sat at the nurse's station, staring at the clock. It was 4:15 p.m. The medical board had packed up for the weekend. Declan Hayes was officially a no-show. "Close his file, Clara," the charge nurse said gently, walking past the desk. "You can't care more about his recovery than he does." Clara looked out the window at the pouring rain. A man who didn't care about himself was one thing. A man who was willing to lose the roof over a 7-year-old child's head out of sheer, stubborn pride was something else entirely. She didn't close the file. Instead, she grabbed her raincoat, shoved Declan's paperwork into her bag, and grabbed her car keys. She was going to his house, and she was going to give him a piece of her mind. The drive to Declan's address took 20 minutes through the blinding rain. Clara pulled up to a small, modest house at the end of a quiet suburban street. An older model pickup truck sat in the driveway. Its hood was popped open, a tarp hastily thrown over the engine block. Clara grabbed her medical bag out of habit, stepped out into the freezing downpour, and marched up to the front door. She knocked hard. 3 sharp raps. She had her speech prepared. She was going to tell him exactly how irresponsible he was, how the VA system didn't give second chances, and how his son deserved a father who actually tried. The door clicked open. But it wasn't Declan. 7-year-old Sam stood in the doorway. He was wearing an oversized sweater, holding a damp towel in his small hands. When he saw Clara, his eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Are you the nurse?" Sam asked. His voice was quiet, lacking the usual bright energy of a child his age. "Hi, Sam." "Yes, I'm Clara," she said, her anger faltering at the sight of the boy. "Is your dad home?" Sam didn't correct her. He just pushed the door open wider and stepped back. "He's in the living room. He won't wake up." Clara's heart gave a sudden, hard thump. Professional instinct instantly overrode her frustration. She stepped inside, kicking off her wet shoes, and followed Sam down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The living room was cold. The only light came from a small lamp on a side table. Declan was lying on a worn leather sofa. He was covered in a thin fleece blanket, shivering violently. His face was pale, glistening with a heavy sweat, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. Clara rushed to his side and dropped to her knees. She pulled the blanket back. His right leg, the badly injured leg she had been trying to rehabilitate for weeks, was grossly swollen. The skin around the surgical scars was angry and red, radiating heat through his sweatpants. Next to the sofa sat a pair of heavy work boots, completely caked in fresh, wet mud. "Declan," Clara said sharply, pressing 2 fingers to his neck to check his pulse. It was racing. "Declan, can you hear me?" He groaned, turning his head away from the light, but his eyes didn't open. Clara looked back at Sam. The boy was standing by the edge of the coffee table, watching her with terrified eyes. "Sam, what happened?" Clara asked, keeping her voice steady and calm. "Did he fall? Why didn't you come to the clinic today?" Sam gripped the damp towel tightly. "My fever got really bad last night. I was coughing a lot." Clara frowned, looking at the boy. He did look pale, recovering from what was clearly a severe respiratory bug. "Okay, but what happened to his leg?" "The truck wouldn't start," Sam whispered, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes. "He tried to fix it, but it wouldn't turn on." I was crying because my chest hurt. Clara looked at the muddy boots on the floor. A terrible, sinking realization began to form in her chest. The nearest urgent care clinic was at least 2 miles away. "He carried me," Sam said, his voice breaking. "He wrapped me in a blanket and carried me all the way to the doctor in the rain last night. He didn't use his cane because he needed both arms to hold me." Clara stared at the child, completely speechless. The parallel bars, the refusal to put weight on the leg, the exhaustion in his eyes. Declan hadn't been lazy. He had been in absolute agony, and he had pushed himself to the brink of physical collapse just to keep this boy safe. "Please don't be mad at him for missing his appointment," Sam pleaded, taking a step closer to Clara. "He tries really hard." "He's not my dad." Clara froze. "What?" Sam looked down at his shoes. "My dad died when I was little. Uncle Declan came and got me. He promised he wouldn't let anyone take me away. That's why he has to get better." The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows and Declan's ragged breathing. Clara slowly turned her head back to the man on the couch. The judgment she had carried with her for weeks vanished, replaced by a crushing wave of guilt. She looked at the coffee table. Sitting right next to Sam was an amber prescription bottle. It was a heavy military-grade narcotic painkiller, issued by the VA weeks ago. The safety seal was still completely unbroken. Clara didn't waste another second. She dropped her bag on the floor and looked at the boy. "Sam, I need a towel, a bag of ice, and whatever first aid supplies you have. Can you get those for me?" Sam nodded quickly and ran toward the kitchen. He returned a minute later, his arms full. He moved with a quiet efficiency that broke Clara's heart. It was the movement of a child who was entirely used to taking care of adults. Clara folded a blanket and gently slid it under Declan's calf, elevating the injured leg. As she applied the makeshift ice pack to the swollen, angry skin around his knee, Declan flinched. His eyes fluttered open. For a fraction of a second, he looked completely disoriented. Then, his military instincts kicked in. He tried to sit up violently, pushing his weight onto his elbows, his eyes scanning the room for threats. "Whoa, easy," Clara said, putting a firm hand on his chest, pushing him back down. "It's Clara. You're safe. Stop moving." Declan blinked, focusing on her face. The defensive tension in his jaw remained. "What are you doing in my house?" His voice was a rough, exhausted rasp. "I came to yell at you for missing your board evaluation," Clara said evenly. "But it looks like you're already paying the price for it." Declan noticed Sam standing quietly by the armchair. He immediately softened his voice, trying to hide the wince of pain. "Hey, buddy, you should be in bed, your fever." "I'm okay, Uncle December. The nurse is fixing your leg." Declan looked back at Clara. His pride was wounded, clearly hating the fact that she was seeing him like this, helpless, shivering, and grounded on a cheap sofa. "I don't need fixing. I just need to sleep. You can leave." "I'm not going anywhere," Clara said. She turned to Sam and offered a gentle smile. "Sam, your uncle needs quiet to let his fever come down. Why don't you go lie down in your room? I promise I'll stay right here and make sure he's okay." Sam looked at Declan for confirmation. Declan gave him a slow nod. Only then did the boy retreat down the hallway. Once the door clicked shut, the silence in the living room felt heavy. Clara reached out and picked up the amber prescription bottle from the coffee table. She held it up so the dim lamplight caught the plastic. "Oxycodone," Clara read the label. "Prescribed 3 weeks ago by the VA Pain Management Clinic. A full 30-day supply. The safety seal hasn't even been broken." Declan looked away, staring at the ceiling. "I don't like pills." "Declan, you have screws and plates holding your femur and knee together. You carried a 7-year-old child 2 miles in a freezing storm last night. Your body is practically screaming in agony right now. Why won't you take the medication?" "I said I don't need them," he muttered stubbornly. "That is a lie," Clara countered, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I have seen combat veterans with half your injuries begging for this prescription. Tell me the truth." Declan closed his eyes. The muscles in his neck tightened. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all its usual armor. "They knock me out, Clara. They're heavy narcotics. If I take one, I sleep for 8 straight hours." Clara frowned. "That is exactly what your body needs to heal. And if I sleep for 8 hours," Declan said, opening his eyes to look dead into hers, "I don't hear him." Clara froze. "I don't hear if he has a nightmare about his dad," Declan continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't hear if his chest gets tight from the asthma. I don't hear if he calls for me. I am the only one he has left in this world. I can't afford to be unconscious." Clara stared at him. The air in her lungs simply vanished. She had judged him for weeks. She had thought he was a man who had given up. Instead, she was looking at a man who was enduring unimaginable, bone-deep pain every single day, just so he could keep one ear open in the dark for a little boy who wasn't even his. Slowly, Clara lowered the bottle. She reached down to adjust the ice pack on his leg. This time, her touch wasn't clinical. It was incredibly gentle. Her fingers lingered against his warm skin. Declan looked at her hand, surprised by the softness. He didn't pull away. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere inside the VA rehabilitation clinic felt entirely different. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to follow Declan Hayes like a shadow was gone. In its place was a quiet, gritty determination. "4 more, Declan," Clara said, standing a few feet away from the parallel bars. "Keep your weight centered." Declan's jaw was tight, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. But this time, he didn't drop the bars. He didn't reach for his cane. He pushed through the burning ache in his right thigh, forcing the weakened, scarred muscles to stabilize his heavy frame. "I'm centered," he grunted, his voice strained, but entirely lacking its usual hostility. "Tell him he's leaning, Sam," Clara said, glancing over her shoulder. Sam wasn't sitting perfectly still in the plastic waiting chair anymore. He was standing right next to Clara, holding a bright blue digital stopwatch in his small hands. "You're leaning to the left, Uncle Dec," Sam announced seriously. Declan let out a short, breathless laugh. It was a rusty sound, like a heavy door opening for the first time in years. He adjusted his posture, squaring his broad shoulders. "Copy that, Sam," correcting. Clara smiled. It was a small, brilliant thing that made Declan's chest tighten with something entirely unrelated to physical therapy. Since the night of the storm, everything between them had shifted. The walls Declan had spent a year building hadn't vanished completely, but Clara had found the gate. She no longer treated him like a difficult, broken patient. She treated him like a man carrying a massive load, and instead of telling him to drop it, she simply offered to help him carry it. She had purposefully integrated Sam into the therapy sessions. By giving the boy a job, counting repetitions, holding the stopwatch, bringing fresh towels she had removed the terrifying helplessness Sam felt watching his uncle in pain. And for Declan, seeing Sam involved, seeing the boy actually smile and interact, was a better painkiller than anything in that amber bottle. Declan finished his final set and carefully sat down on the edge of the blue mat, grabbing a towel to wipe his face. Clara walked over and handed him a paper cup. Black. No sugar. Just the way you like to punish your taste buds. It builds character, Declan said, taking the coffee. His fingers brushed against hers. The physical contact was brief, just a second of warm skin against calluses, but neither of them pulled away immediately. He looked up at her, really looked at her. He noticed the slight shadow of exhaustion under her eyes, the stray strand of dark hair escaping her ponytail, and the calm, steady way she held his gaze. "You look tired today," Declan observed quietly, keeping his voice low so Sam wouldn't hear. "Double shift," Clara admitted, leaning her hip against the parallel bars. "We were understaffed on the pediatric floor this morning. You should go home and sleep." "I'm fine, Declan. I wanted to make sure you didn't slack off on your squats." "I don't slack off," he said, the corner of his mouth turning up in a rare, genuine smile. "I'm highly motivated." He glanced briefly at Sam, who was currently busy organizing the brightly colored resistance bands by size. Then he looked back at Clara. The unspoken meaning hung in the quiet space between them. He wasn't just motivated for Sam anymore. For the first time since his brother died, Declan Hayes felt like he was building a future, rather than just surviving the present. But the VA system didn't care about quiet victories or unspoken feelings. And as Clara walked back to the nurse's station to log his progress, she had no idea that a man in a gray suit was already pulling Declan's file from the administrative archives. Arthur Vance was a man who measured human lives in risk percentages and liability forms. As a senior case manager for the VA's Social Services Division, his gray suit and perfectly organized briefcase always brought bad news. On a quiet Tuesday morning, he sat at the nurse's station, tapping a pen against Declan Hayes' medical file. Clara stood across from him, her arms crossed defensively. "His mobility has improved by 30%. Arthur," Clara argued, keeping her voice low. "He's putting active weight on the joint. He is completely compliant with his physical therapy." "I see the numbers, Clara," Vance replied smoothly. "But I also see the reality. He is a medically retired combat veteran with a shattered femur, chronic pain, and severe sleep deprivation. He is unmarried, currently unemployed, and has zero extended family support. That is not a stable environment for a 7-year-old child." "He is a great father," Clara snapped, the word slipping out before she could correct it to Time's uncle. "It's not about being great. It's about liability," Vance said, closing the folder. "If Child Protective Services reviews this file, they will flag it. If he takes a bad fall at home and can't get up, who takes care of the boy? The system has rules, Clara. And right now, Mr. Hayes is a walking red flag." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but a slight movement caught her eye. Standing in the hallway, completely still, was Declan. He was holding Sam's small hand. His face was a mask of absolute, unreadable stone. He had heard every word. When it was time for his session, the warmth that had been building between Declan and Clara over the past month was entirely gone. It was as if a steel vault had slammed shut. Declan moved through his exercises with mechanical, brutal efficiency. He didn't complain about the pain. He didn't look at her. When Clara offered him a towel, he took it without letting his fingers brush against hers. "You're pushing too hard, Declan," Clara warned as he loaded extra weight onto the leg press. "You need to pace yourself." "Just log the reps, Nurse Reed," Declan said. His voice was flat, cold. Clara flinched at the formal title. "Declan, if this is about what Vance said, Mr. Vance is doing his job. You should do yours," he interrupted, staring straight at the ceiling. "I don't need a cheerleader. I need medical clearance." The rejection stung. It felt like a physical step backward into the dark, rainy night where she had first found him. Clara stepped away, her professional mask slipping back into place. But Sam wasn't fooled. The boy sat on his chair, the blue stopwatch resting uselessly in his lap. He looked at Declan, then at Clara. When Declan went into the locker room to change his shirt, Sam walked quietly over to Clara. "Are you mad at Uncle Deck again?" Sam asked softly. "No, Sam." Clara forced a reassuring smile, crouching down to his eye level. "Your uncle is just having a tough day. He's in a lot of pain. He's not hurting in his leg," Sam whispered, looking toward the locker room door. "He only gets that quiet when he's scared." Before Clara could process the immense emotional intelligence of the 7-year-old, she noticed Declan's canvas jacket draped over a chair. A folded piece of paper had slipped out of the side pocket and fallen onto the floor. Clara picked it up to put it back, but as she glanced at the thick official letterhead, her breath hitched. It wasn't a medical bill. It was an application form for the Times Street Jude Military Boarding Academy for boys. The tuition was astronomical. The boarding was full-time. And at the bottom of the page, in Declan's sharp, steady handwriting, the application was already signed. The cold afternoon wind whipped across the VA parking lot. Declan was unlocking the passenger door of his old truck, helping Sam climb into the cab. "Put your seatbelt on, buddy." "I'll be right in," Declan said quietly, shutting the heavy metal door. As he turned to walk around to the driver's side, Clara stepped into his path. She didn't have her clipboard. She wasn't wearing her clinical smile. She was holding the heavy parchment paper of the Street Jude Military Boarding Academy application. Declan's jaw tightened the moment he saw it. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "It fell out of your jacket," Clara said, refusing to step back, even as he towered over her. $35,000 a year, Declan? Full-time boarding in another state? You are going to send a 7-year-old boy who has already lost his parents 300 miles away? Declan reached out and snatched the paper from her hand. He folded it sharply and shoved it into his pocket. "It is a highly rated academy. He will have a stable roof, 3 meals a day, and an education I could never give him." "He doesn't need an academy," Clara fired back, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "He needs you." "I am a liability," Declan finally snapped, the volume of his voice making him wince, though he quickly checked to ensure Sam's window was rolled up. He stepped closer to Clara, his gray eyes burning with an exhaustion that went straight to his bones. "You heard Arthur Vance," Declan hissed, the words tearing out of his throat. "Look at me, Clara. I am a medically discharged cripple with chronic pain. I have no job, no savings left after this tuition, and no wife to help me carry the load. If I keep him here, the state is going to take him. Do you know what happens to quiet, traumatized boys in the foster system?" Clara stared at him. The sheer panic in his voice stripped away the tough SEAL exterior, revealing a man who was utterly terrified of failing the one person he loved most. "So you're just going to give up?" she asked softly. "You're going to push him away before they can take him?" "I am protecting him," Declan gritted his teeth. "I am stepping out of the way so his life isn't ruined by my dead weight." That's what a soldier does. You sacrifice yourself for the objective. Sam is the objective. "Sam is a little boy," Clara countered fiercely. "He isn't a mission, Declan. He is a child who sat in a chair for a month, completely silent, just watching, to make sure you didn't fall down. He doesn't want a pristine boarding school. He wants the man who carried him 2 miles in a freezing storm." Declan looked away, staring at the wet asphalt. His broad chest heaved as he fought to control his breathing. "It doesn't matter what he wants, or what I want. Vance will pull my file on Friday. I have to sign the custody transfer to the school before then. It's done." He turned away from her, reaching for the handle of the truck door. Clara stood in the freezing wind, watching the man she was falling in love with prepare to destroy his own heart just to keep his nephew safe. "You're a coward, Declan Hayes," Clara said. Declan froze, his hand resting on the door handle. Declan slowly turned away from the truck door. The wind howled across the empty parking lot, but the space between him and Clara suddenly felt terrifyingly still. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet rumble. "You heard me." Clara stepped closer, her chin raised. "You survived combat. You survived a catastrophic injury. You carried a sick child through a freezing storm on a shattered leg. But the second you have to face the possibility of letting someone actually help you carry the emotional weight, you run away." Declan's jaw clenched. "I am trying to save his life." "You are trying to save yourself from failing," Clara shot back. "You think you're a burden. You think because your leg is broken, you're not enough for him. So you're shipping him away to a sterile academy where no one will ever hug him when it thunders, just to guarantee you don't make a mistake." Declan stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. The fierce armor of the Navy SEAL was fracturing, piece by piece, under the weight of her words. "Give me the paper, Declan," Clara demanded, holding out her hand. He didn't move. "Give it to me." For a long, agonizing moment, Declan just looked at her. Then, slowly, with a trembling hand, he pulled the folded application from his jacket pocket. Clara took it. Without breaking eye contact, she ripped the heavy parchment in half, then in half again. She let the pieces scatter into the wind. Declan's eyes widened in panic. "What did you just do?" "Vance is going to pull my file on Friday." "Arthur Vance isn't pulling your file on Friday. Clara interrupted smoothly, her voice suddenly losing its anger, replaced by a deep, steady calm. Because I already transferred your case. Declan froze. The panic in his eyes morphed into sudden, raw devastation. What? I went to the clinical director this morning, Clara said, taking another step closer, until she was close enough to feel the heat radiating from his heavy canvas jacket. I removed myself as your physical therapist. You've been reassigned to a senior specialist. Declan looked like the ground had just vanished beneath his boots. The man who never backed down from a fight suddenly looked entirely lost. You're leaving us? Professionally? Yes, Clara said softly. It's a strict violation of VA protocol to be romantically involved with a patient on my active caseload. Declan stopped breathing. Clara reached out, her small, warm hands gripping the rigid muscles of his arms. I can't be your nurse anymore, Declan, because I want to be your family. If you'll let me. The silence that followed was absolute. Declan looked down at her. He saw the fierce loyalty in her eyes, the complete lack of pity, and the quiet promise of a safe harbor. The exhaustion that had weighed him down for a year finally broke. He dropped his cane. It clattered against the asphalt. Declan wrapped his massive arms around Clara, pulling her flush against his chest, and buried his face in her hair. He let out a long, shaky breath, holding on to her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Clara held him back just as tightly, wrapping her arms around his waist. When he finally pulled back, he didn't say a word. He just framed her face with his rough hands and kissed her. It was a desperate, grounding kiss, filled with the promise of a man who had finally stopped running. A small tapping sound broke the moment. They both turned. Inside the truck, Sam had his face pressed against the passenger window. He was smiling. Declan let out a soft laugh, resting his forehead against Clara's. He's watching. He's always watching, Clara smiled, reaching down to pick up Declan's fallen cane. She handed it back to him. Come on, let's take our boy home. Declan took the cane. He didn't try to hide his limp as they walked around to the driver's side of the truck. He didn't have to be a perfect soldier anymore. He just had to be a father. And for the first time, as Clara's hand slipped into his, he knew he was going to be enough.